Here we go into part 2. Now, I will tell you that I thought Randy's background was so spiffy with the parchment and all that and his lettering that I kept it for this since it was a 2-part series. So here's my title for tonight, and there's kind of a story to this title. The title is, What is in a Servant? Now, I can't take credit for this title. I got an email from Jared and he said, here's what I want you to talk about. What is in a servant? And I sat there for some time looking at this title saying, I wonder what that means. And maybe it was a typo. I don't know. But God moves in mysterious ways. It kind of led me into things that I might not have otherwise looked at. So I appreciate the title. And we're going to actually answer this question at the end of the class tonight. But you have to wait till the end to get that. This is going to be, I hope you learn as much from this class as I learned getting ready for it. Because, I've heard a lot of classes. I've taught several classes on service, but I saw some things as I was doing this class that I hadn't thought of before. So that was kind of exciting. All right, we're going to start off in one of the verses that Randy read last week. This is a great verse to look at if you're talking about the idea of service. It's hard to top. So we'll read this together again. In John, the mother of Zebedee's sons come to Jesus. They come to him, and so she comes to Jesus with her sons kneeling down and asked a favor of him. What is it you want? He asked. She said, grant that one of these 2 sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said to them. Can you drink the cup I am going to drink? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father. When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the 2 brothers. Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. What a great passage to talk about service, to jump off talking about service. I think that sometimes we give these guys a hard time when we read this passage. How could you do that? But we got to think about who they were. These guys were servants. They were great servants. Think this is near the end of Jesus' personal ministry. They've been following him around for 3 years. These guys accurately said to Jesus, we've given up everything to follow you. They had followed him around. They had been at his beck and call. They'd gone out on doing every kind of thing imaginable. They'd gone out on preaching expeditions. When Jesus fed the 5,000, they had the glamorous role of passing out the food and picking up the leftovers. Whatever needed to be done, these guys did it. They served all the time. They were guys that had humbled themselves. They were guys who had served. And so that's the context that this happens in. So at the end they come and say, hey, we would like something from you in return. Now, that's it. So that's an interesting question. I think that we serve quite a bit as a church. You could talk about some more than others perhaps, but I think as a group, we have a pretty good ethic in terms of service. But here's the thing about service. Done over a long period of time, we start to expect things in return for that service, I think. So here's my opening question for you, we're not going to run around with the microphone because you're going to be limited to 1 or 2 words, and I'll repeat it so everybody can hear it, okay? What do we expect in exchange for our years of service? Raise your, yeah, Sherry.
Praise.
Praise from people, okay. What else? David? Recognition. Okay, we want recognition sometimes. Yes?
Eternity with God.
Okay, eternity with God. Nothing much, just, yeah. Okay, yeah, I think reward in heaven. Yes, Lois. I'm sorry? Answered prayers. Oh, that's an interesting, I didn't think of that one. I'm going to pop up the ones I thought of in a minute. But yeah, I've served a lot, so God should answer my prayers and answer them the way I want them answered, right? Yes, Sandy. Okay, to have service done to us in return. I want something back tangible like that. Yes? Titles. Okay, titles, position. That kind of a thing. Yeah, that's very good. Yes?
Perfect life. A perfect life.
A perfect life. Okay, that's a pretty high expectation, but yeah, we expect our life to go well, to be smooth. Even if we don't quite expect perfect, we expect way above average. Okay? Corbin? Success. Okay, there's a lot of, we could go on for a while. Okay, I'm going to give you my list. There it is. Some of these you had recognition. We want to be recognized as a person who serves and have recognition in the church, perhaps. We want position. That was mentioned. And so, that can be important to us. Appreciation. Access. That's something that these guys have been following around Jesus through the formative days. When he gets to be big time, they still want access to him. They still want to be in the inner circle. I don't know exactly what the inner circle is, but we get hung up on the inner circle sometimes. Sometimes I think I've been in it, and a lot of times I've not. But they wanted access. They wanted to be there. We want to be respected for the service we've done. Maybe we want some level of authority. I've got some position that, isn't that the way it works in companies? You start out at the bottom and you work your way up and you serve and you work hard. But eventually, you get the corner office and you get to boss people around. Don't think that doesn't creep into the church sometimes and by way of service. I think that happens sometimes. And reward. Heaven was mentioned. I think we have an expectation. And again, over time. I don't think we start out saying, okay, well, this is my plan. I'm going to serve, and I expect these things back for serving. It's not like that. But after a couple of years, 5 years, a couple of decades, we start to sense an attitude. I've served a lot. I've got some things coming back to me now. I've done lots of canned food drives. You know how many canned food? I've given blood. I've done all of these things. Shouldn't my prayer get answered? We can feel that way. Here's an interesting thing. This is the first thing that I thought of that I hadn't thought of before that really just knocked my socks off. And that is, Jesus exchanged all of these things that we want out of service. Instead of serving to get those things, he gave up all those things to serve. Completely backwards from the way that we think. Look over in Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2, and we will pick up in verse 5. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Jesus had all of that stuff. You got to think about it. He was equal with God. You know, sometimes I think that we have trouble serving because, you know, we have a nice house and it's inconvenient. We don't, look, none of us, you know, a lot of you have nice houses. You know, I like my house. But none of us have a house that was equivalent with what Jesus had. He left heaven. You know, we talk about authority and position. I mean, where do you go from equal with God? I mean, it's downhill from there. You know, there's only one direction to go from that position. He gave that up to become a servant. See, we try to ride service on the up escalator. Jesus took the down escalator to become a servant. So it was a reversal. You know, there's a verse that we study with people that is very familiar to us. In Luke 9:23, Jesus said to them all, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Okay? Why self-denial? Here's the thing about self-denial that I think we miss a lot of times. See, here's how I think we hear that. When Jesus says you got to be committed and you got to have self-denial. I'll give you an example. They're gearing up for football just a little ways away from here, right? I mean, we're excited in just a few weeks. You know, we get to see how the new coach is going to do, and you know, we're trying to keep up with recruiting if we pay attention to all that stuff. So you know, people are excited about football, and we expect those guys. We expect those guys that are on the team to be denying themselves, right? I mean, we expect them to be in the weight room working out. We expect them to be, you know, it's 100 degrees, and we think if we walk to our car, we're going to die. But we expect them to be out there on the practice field just, you know, going at it. Deny yourself. Get after it. Be committed. Because you're a Gator, and I want to sit in my air-conditioned house and watch you play football in a few weeks, and I expect results. And if you're going to be on this team, you have to behave this way, or you're not in the club. And see, I think when we read this verse, sometimes that's what we think Jesus means. Hey, if you want to be on my team, you've got to deny yourself. You've got to be committed. You've got to go. And I think there's a certain amount of truth to that. But what he's really saying is, if you're going to follow me for even one step, you have no choice but to deny yourself. Because Jesus denied himself. You can't follow him without going the same way he's going, without doing the things he's doing. And self-denial was what he did. He left heaven to come and serve us. So we're going to have to deny ourselves and serve if we're going to follow him. That's just the way it works. Yeah. Otherwise, we're freelancing. We're not following him. You know, I think there are a lot of obstacles to serving, and you can, you know, kind of work up your own list. But, you know, time is a big deal. You know, I don't have time. It's inconvenient. I have other things that I want to do. You know, I'm getting older these days. You know, it's just not as easy as it once was. You laugh. It's going to happen to you sooner or later. You know, it's the way we have all kinds of reasons. You know, I'm not going to try to guess what all your reasons are. But there are obstacles to serving. Are we willing to be like Jesus? Are we willing to deny ourselves and give to serve? Okay, that's the first point. If that was a point. I'm not sure it was a point, but that was the first thing I wanted to talk about. Okay, here's the next thing that I found to be really interesting. Who are we serving? Now, so I started out, you know, again, trying to answer the strange question that Jared sent me. I started out trying to look up verses about how we're servants of each other, right? And so I said, well, let me get my trusty concordance out and look that up. I had a lot of trouble finding that. Now, I found lots of verses that talked about serving. Serve one another, serve, do those kind of things. But in terms of the phrase, I'm a servant of this church, or I'm a servant of this person, it's very hard to find. Here's what I found a lot. Servants of God. Yep. Servants of Christ. Now, I've got a bunch of verses up here. We're not going to read these because they're all essentially the same. These are the beginning of books. And at the beginning of these books, Romans, Philippians, 1 Peter, Jude, Revelation, you can go back and read them later. Just read the first few verses of these books. They describe themselves as servants of God, servants of Christ. Here's what's interesting about that. The people who describe them that way served people a lot. In fact, I was going to ask the question, who are the greatest servants you know of in the Bible? But, the answer is going to be Paul, Peter, John. The guys that wrote this, okay? So we'll save the time. Those are the people you think about that really served the church, that served other people, that made themselves servants to their brothers and sisters. But they described themselves as servants of God. They served their brothers and sisters as an extension of their service to God. I think that matters. Now, that's Val and Corbin. Look how young they were back then. That's going way back. Betsy and I love Val and Corbin. We get with them. We've gotten with them for a long time. We got with them way back when they looked like that. We love Val and Corbin. We get with them every other week. All right, now, this is where it gets fun. That's Flo. That's Flo when we were babysitting her. Now, look how happy she is. We try to get her to act sad right before they come home so that, they think that she really missed them while they were gone on their date. Because, we want to get invited back to babysit her again. But, she's having a great time, okay? It's a cute picture. It's a cheap trick if you're speaking in front of a group to use baby pictures. But that's not really the point, okay? Now, this is our house. The picture on the left are some toys that we have purchased for Flo. Now look, before you think, wow, these people are just over, honest truth, we went out to garage sales. We didn't spend a huge amount of money, all right? But we cared. We did buy them. So, that's her musical elephant and her little piano and the blankie, and she's got blocks and the little thing you push the beads around on, which, there's a certain way that's supposed to work. For some reason, babies never use it the way they're supposed to, but they still have fun with it. She's got a high chair at our house and a stroller and a porta-crib at our house that we bought. And the coup de grace, she has a lion. You buy a bunch of stuff. There's no accounting for what the kid's going to latch onto. But that thing there, she is in love with. She talks to it. Somehow or other, she figured out that lions are supposed to pounce, and she has the lion pounce on blocks. But she loves the lion, okay? Here's my question. How do you think Val and Corbin feel about Betsy and I knowing that we got that stuff for their daughter? How does that change how they feel about us? Now, you can ask them. I didn't ask them ahead of time, so I can't answer on their behalf. But I can tell you how Jesus feels about it. Look at Matthew chapter 26. This is a long passage, so we're not going to read all of it, but it's the story of the sheep and the goats. It's a familiar verse. You've probably read it. It's basically a Judgment Day story. And Jesus at Judgment Day is talking to the sheep, and he's talking to the goats, and he says to the sheep, I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat, in verse 40. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. And I was sick or in prison, and you visited me. You took care of needs. All right, he lists a bunch of things. And the sheep say to him, when did we ever do this? When did we see you this way? When did we do these things for you, Jesus? I'm glad you're bringing me in, but I don't remember doing those things for you. And he says, whenever you did this for the least of one of my children, you did it for me. Then he turns around and talks to the goats and, says the same thing in the negative. I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty and you didn't give me anything to drink. He goes through the whole sequence again. And they said, when did we ever do that? We would have taken care of you, Jesus. We would have served you if you had been in that circumstance. And he says, when you didn't do it for the least of one of these children of mine, you ignored me. That's how Jesus feels about it. And so as we serve each other, it's an extension of our service to God. I think that if we really get a grasp on that concept, it will radically change how we serve one another and serve our community. Whether we're serving our brothers and sisters or those that we hope someday will be our brothers and sisters, they're still God's children. And we need to serve as an extension of our service to God. What is our motivation for service? It can't be the motivations of the world that we talked about at the beginning. It can't be position or authority or recognition or those kind of things. What motivated Jesus to serve? What did he get out of it? Nothing. What motivated Jesus to serve was love. I've often talked, as I've been up here, I've talked about what I consider the great virtues, and that I think that make perhaps the greatest of virtues are gratitude and humility. And I think that those are great virtues, but the greatest is love. I mean, I think we've got to serve out of love, and I'm going to tell you a story about that in a moment to illustrate the point. But Galatians 5:6 is a great verse. Paul says to the Galatians, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. That's what service. Look, I'm not saying that all there is to love is service, but you try loving somebody without serving. Not possible. Not possible. John 13:34, all men will know you are my disciples if you love one another. So love is really what has to drive our service amongst ourselves and in our community. Turn to John chapter 15. I may have shared some of this before, but this is new to me. If you asked me to provide an accurate count of how many times I've read John chapter 15, it would be impossible for me to do it. John is the book that I've read more than any book in the Bible. For a long period of time in my life, I tried to read the book of John every week. But I've read this chapter so many times. And I feel like I understand it better now than I have, and it's a recent understanding. And so I wanted to revisit that idea. We won't read the whole chapter because I think it's familiar to you. But Jesus says in verse 1, I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Verse 5, I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Here's the word picture that Jesus is giving us. So I want you to think about what he's using as an image. He says it's a grape vineyard, which was very common for them. It was familiar to them. So he says it's this vineyard, And there's a gardener, there's someone who keeps the vineyard, who's planted the vineyard, who takes care of it. And he has planted in the vineyard a vine. And so the vine spreads out, and out of the vine grow branches. Now, it's interesting about branches. The branches are where the fruit actually happens on a vine. The grapes don't grow directly on the vine, they grow on the branches. But the branches can't do that on their own. They're sustained by the vine, which is sustained by the root, which draws nutrients from the soil. All right, so here's the picture. You've got nutrients in the soil. The nutrients in the soil are absorbed by the roots. The nutrients go through the roots into the vine, and as it travels through the vine, the nutrients get pushed out through the branches, and at the ends of the branches, where there's nothing left, fruit comes out. All right, that's our picture. So what's he talking about? Now, obviously, he says, look, you've got to remain in me. The branch has got nothing to offer on its own. It has to get it through that process we've just discussed. What is he talking about? Verse 9. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down his life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last. And so whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. Do you see what's happening here? The love of God is in Jesus. Jesus says, if you remain in me, my love will be in you. And then he tells us to love each other and bear fruit. What's the nutrient that's driving all of this? Love. He's talking about the love of God flowing through Jesus into us and resulting in us loving each other, and included in that love that we have for each other, serving one another. You know that on the day where we sit in our comfy chair and say, I know that we need volunteers for this, or I know that maybe I could serve in this way, or this person needs help. I think that if we have this picture in mind, more often than not, we're going to do the right thing. Not because somebody said, hey, you need to do this. Let me guilt you into serving. No, the idea is that we do it because we've been loved. And God's love has flowed through Jesus into us. And we just don't have a lot of choice except for that love to come out at the end of the branch and produce good fruit. That's the way that it is supposed to work. So, here comes the answer to the question. Turn to Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1, and let's pick up in verse 27. To them God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. So what's in a servant? Christ. That's what's in a servant, is Christ. God is in a servant. God serves us. God gave himself for us. Jesus gave himself for us so that we can lay down our lives for each other. I could read a lot more verses about service, but I don't know that it would help that much. I hope that the things we've talked about tonight will be something that's a jumping off point for you to look at your life as I look at mine and say, how can I express appreciation? How can I demonstrate God's love to others through service? There's so much to do. There's so much to do within the church, within the community, in the world around us. As we heard this Sunday, it's expressed so well, needs hope, needs love, needs answers. And God has blessed us with so much. Let's serve and give to others as we go through our life and produce the fruit that Jesus talks about in these verses. Thanks very much.